You can have technically perfect advice, but it does have to go through the mental filter of your client. It has to make sense to them. And over time, that sense making activity is what bonds clients to you. They really have a sense that you know what matters.
Welcome to Price Discovery, Money and Mindset. Go under the hood with Jordan Rodriguez, a certified financial planning professional and certified exit planning advisor, as he explores the art of balancing wealth with personal fulfillment. We'll hear strategies and stories from industry experts, business owners, and thought leaders about navigating the complexities of high net worth families and businesses. Without further ado, here's Jordan Rodriguez.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Price Discovery, Money and Mindset. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Moira Somers, one of the founding members of the Blackwood Family Enterprise Services Group and author of Advice That Sticks. Dr. Somers specializes in family dynamics and the psychology of wealth. She works with enterprise-owning families to assist in personal and business transitions of all kinds. We discuss some of the things that exist outside of spreadsheets and calculators that maybe we don't pay as much attention to as we should, the emotions behind money and decision-making. Enjoy. Dr. Moira Somers, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on. I was really excited when you said yes to this. I know we talked and given a little bit of background, but this is really where I want the season to start. I think having the psychological component of finances explored is a great way to kick off a season that's going to include a lot of really different dynamic guests. But I think a natural first place to start is we always talk about the concept with our high net worth clients and business owner clients of who's at the table, meaning the professional team, CPAs, attorneys of different flavors, bankers. Would you mind describing what your role or your seat at the table is?
It's not intuitively obvious, is it, that you'd have a shrink at the table? But often psychologists are called in to help for a number of issues, including setting up governance structures and dealing with the family dynamics issues that sometimes arise in that regard, Jordan. If there are two things that we could say are emotionally charged, it's money. They'd be money and family. And so to get to the best decision making, it's not that emotion is the enemy or irrelevant. It's that we need to tap into the right kind of emotion and make sure that the other kind of hot things have settled down so that people can really get in touch with what they want to do and so that they can get to the finish line in terms of getting that stuff done.
Sure. Now, how does financial psychology, I guess that's a term that I'm going to use, but you just described it much more eloquently, just the emotions and the emotionally charged aspects of money and family. How do those things uniquely affect decision-making for high net worth families and business owners?
There are generational differences in terms of how families embark on a wealth journey. Of course, most wealth is, at least up until now, most wealth within a family has been generated by the first generation. And that's true over and over and over again with every generation. About 80% of wealthy individuals have generated that wealth by themselves. It hasn't come about through inheritance or through some sort of massive settlement. There are, of course, families where that is true. So the journey of the first generation wealth builders is by definition very different from the journey of their children and then their grandchildren. And what we need to do is make sure that people understand each other, that the hopes and desires of the generation that created that wealth, that they be heard, that they be understood, that a solid grounding in values be passed on, and then that those children and grandchildren be helped to develop the financial and the relational skills to work with managing money, that they didn't have the task of necessarily building themselves. It just came to them. And so they need to be extra savvy in terms of knowing who it is that they can trust at the advisory table, what they need to be asking for, and what they need to be learning. Most first generation wealth builders, for example, Jordan, never had to deal with the issue of a prenup.
Sure.
Right? They never had to deal with the issues of, some of my clients have to get kidnapping insurance, for heaven's sakes. So these are really different issues from family to family, but also within the family. And sometimes the other people around the table really don't appreciate it. You can have a lawyer who may understand very well the financial benefits in getting a prenup, but I've seen too often that handled unskillfully, the relationship can blow up because of it. So what we need are people who understand both the technical sides of money and the personal sides of money, and who have ways of integrating them.
So in your experience, do these multi-generational wealthy families just by default have a healthier psychological relationship with money, or is it still something that they need to work really diligently at?
I think it doesn't come naturally to most people. Money is emotionally charged across the socioeconomic spectrum. What is different, of course, about people who have gone the wealth journey is that they often have learned the skill of working with professionals and of separating the wheat from the chaff in that regard. They often do have people that they know have their own best interest at heart, and by extension would be able to identify really good resources for their children. But family is family, and we often all need help in having better discussions within the family, of learning how to bring really differing points of view together.
You have an extensive background in clinical neuropsychology, and I'll admit that term scared the heck out of me when I was preparing for this discussion. How has that background influenced or aided your ability to work with clients? And I guess a secondary question that I always like to ask is, how has it shaped your own experience with personal views on wealth?
Mm. It's a weird pathway. It's not a direct line from being a clinician to being a family wealth psychologist, but they absolutely are linked, Jordan. First of all, I began my research career looking at things like procrastination and why it is that people have difficulty following through with their own best intentions for their lives. And certainly as I was a professor at a medical school and worked in hospital settings, that issue was paramount in terms of following through with medical advice. What makes it hard for people to do that? But here's where it started. Here's where the money thing started to come into it. Working as a neuropsychologist, I work with people who have either suffered devastating and traumatic brain injuries so that things change in a heartbeat. They may have had a stroke, for example. They may have had an accident, and suddenly life gets divided into before and after because of that neurological event. And then I also work with people who have more gradual disease processes like dementias. And in the course of working with that clientele, there was always a number of people, just statistically it happens, who were business owners and whose families were left absolutely clueless about what is it that they should be doing now that the person who's been captain of industry is lying in a coma on a neurosurgical ward. And so I began to understand that if there's another area where people often struggle to implement good advice the way they do with medical stuff, it's in the financial domain. Good advice in both domains, Jordan, is preventative, right? It's often not urgent, it's not pressing, it's not critical that we get an estate plan in place. There's lots of other things that, as we run our businesses, that are more important. But holy cow, if you don't have those, policies and paperwork in order, when the feathers of life hit the fan, not only are you in trouble, but the people you love and who count on you as employees or family members, they're in trouble too. And so that led to just invitations to begin working with these families. As people often blessedly did recover, they realized, okay, I got to get better stuff in place. Or as their heirs took over things, they wanted to do things differently. So that was my journey. It was a little weird in getting there, but I just find that people are people everywhere. No matter what it is we're trying to do in our life, we tend to opt for the easier things. We tend to prefer short-term fixes over long-term digging in and doing the slog to get stuff. We tend to procrastinate on things that cause us anxiety. And so, if we can, wherever it is the strategies get developed in whatever field, if we can just apply them across the board, I think we all end up being able to do better.
I mentioned to you that a lot of the listeners of this podcast aren't necessarily industry folk. It's more clients, high net worth business owners themselves. And they might have experience with, I'm using air quotes, so if you're not on the video version, behavioral finance, filling out a risk tolerance questionnaire, or maybe taking a Myers-Briggs personality test. When things hit the fan, those risk questionnaires go out the window. And even if you are comfortable being down 15% on paper, it's not so fun when you're watching your brokerage account have that same experience in real life. Will you explain how you define, I guess, the line between financial counsel and psychological counsel in the context of the end client?
Sure. I mean, what you just described in terms of behavioral finance is one of those classic things like, well, isn't that interesting and isn't that generally useless? It's just, if you really want to know how people act when they are at the limit of their risk tolerance, ask them what happened the last time they were at the limit of their risk tolerance. And if they haven't ever been in a really scary place, then arrange for them to be, I don't know, arrange for them to have a 2-floor elevator drop on the way to your office so that they come in physiologically aroused, and then you're going to know what they look like. It's just so devilishly difficult to get people understanding what it is that really matters and how it is that they're going to behave in the face of threats to the things that matter. I know, just speaking from personal experience, my husband had a health scare about 6 or 8 years ago. It made me want, and it happened at a time of incredible turmoil politically in the world. And, I'm pretty good at stress management, but I have to tell you, I made the decision right then and there that I was going to move more money into cash than I'd ever had in cash before, because I just wanted this buffer that I hadn't realized until that moment was important to me. It was the sort of thing that it was okay to talk to my financial advisor about and to do, because it wasn't blowing up my financial future by suddenly becoming super conservative. It was just I understand this differently now, and this makes rational sense as well as emotional and relational sense to have a bigger buffer than I thought I wanted beforehand. So that's what we're trying to figure out. Even the big leaders in the fields of behavioral finance. I'm thinking about Meyer Statman. He talks about different generations of behavioral finance. So the first one was, people are inherently irrational, and we need to protect them against their own irrationality. And the second generation of behavioral finance was that not everything that matters falls under the category of being economically the best thing to do. Right? Clearly it's economically the best thing to do to never have kids. Is a financial advisor ever going to say, don't do it? Because there are some things that matter more than the bottom line. And so the second generation of behavioral finance was really about looking at people aren't abnormally irrational, they're normally irrational, and that they behave according to things other than a desire to always maximize the bottom line. And now we're on to a third generation of behavioral finance, which is really about viewing money as a tool for well-being. And it doesn't mean that we're not prone to some of those foibles in thinking, to hindsight bias or confirmation bias, all of those things that are easier to examine on, frankly, if you're a professor, than it is to teach people how to have a values discussion about money. But nevertheless, that's where the field has gone. We still have blind spots and biases that we need to be aware of. And financial advisors absolutely need to get better at understanding what matters to people other than securing their financial future.
You highlighted so many things that I want to double click on. I guess the first, so not everybody has the benefit of having such a scientific method background like you do. Are there any specific tools that you leverage in your process that you subscribe to that could be repeated or replicable, or is it really just you have so much experience in your way of thinking through things that is the secret sauce?
The most important thing I think that people can do is slow down in their decision making and talk to wise people, including the people around their dinner table every night. Elicit what matters to people and have people around you who can elicit from you what matters to you. There are some decisions that in business, for example, that do have to be made quickly, but mostly good planning prevents the need to, it really reduces the need for quick decisions because you've considered contingencies. So I don't know much, I don't know that there's necessarily a process that I could hand over to everybody, but to say, slow down, because that's where most of the errors in decision making happen. And don't do it alone. Have people that you can talk to, have a circle of business peers. That's why business networks are so incredibly helpful to a lot of people. And as you increase in your business success, you need to find peer networks that are, dealing with the same issues that you are, the same, often you have to switch mastermind groups or switch peer groups because you're not getting what you need out of it, or just circumstances have changed. So to always be telling the truth about your circumstances, your goals, and how they might be changing over time, and getting the appropriate supports in place.
You've used a
process, I think.
Sure. And you've used a couple different words: goals, values. Maybe this is my anecdotal experience, but there's plenty of people that are current clients or people I've encountered throughout the course of my career when they're working with private wealth management, financial advisor, whatever term you want to use. The bottom line rate of return on their portfolio is what they think they're hiring us for. And sometimes when we bring up financial objectives, goals, their family values, we're met with a little bit of confusion, resistance. Hey, that's not really what we're here to discuss. Can you just talk to the importance of having those things well defined and communicated clearly?
If people just want you to maximize their bottom line, then you're taking your marching orders from them. But the problem is really, first of all, that there's usually more than one person in a family unit coming to you, right? So The other people around them may not feel the same way. And secondly, things change over time. I think many, many more people right now are more concerned about the impact of their investing on the climate, for example. I live in Canada, where, for heaven's sake, fire season started in February. Like, what the heck? This is a different world. And I think investment decisions and business decisions and how we raise and talk to our children, all of those things are in flux as a result. So it really, I am going to speak to the financial professionals just for a sec, Jordan, because you can have technically perfect advice, but it does have to go through the mental filter of your client. It has to make sense to them. And over time, that sense-making activity is what bonds clients to you. They really have a sense that you know what matters to them. There have been study after study of high net worth individuals who say they really do not trust that their current advisor understands their goals. Holy cow. Holy cow. And there's, they have access to some of the best talent out there. And if such a huge swath of them feel like their advisors don't understand them, then it's clear that some of those discussions haven't been taking place. So part of the advisor's job, just like it's part of the healthcare provider's job, is to say, I know this might not be quite what you're expecting in this meeting, but we found that it's really important to talk about these things. So as a healthcare provider, I will say, I might say, this is the best recommendation that's coming from your physician about what medication to take. But I hear that you're really struggling with side effects. How do you think we could deal with those side effects, right? I'm often called on to partner with patients who might just like jettison everything because they don't know how to deal with some of the problems. Similarly, in a financial advisor's office, does the financial advisor know what kind of argument his or her advice might be precipitating? Do you ever look out the window after an appointment and see what that couple's doing in the car? Michael Kitces talks about how financial advisors generate a non-trivial amount of conflict in marriages. I think he's right. I think he's right.
Excellent. And now I'll be sure to link the book that you wrote, Advice That Sticks, in the show notes. Now, it is geared toward industry professionals, but I think anybody who's listening would find it interesting. It was eye-opening for me. I actually listened to it and read it so that I could be sure to take the themes and internalize them and be able to use them in my own day-to-day. Now, one of the most important concepts throughout your book, and I guess you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was your intention, is that a lot of the times when advice isn't adhered to, whether it's from the financial perspective, medical perspective, we always have the idea that this person received technically sound advice and they didn't implement it because they were lazy, scared, nervous, whatever it is. A lot of the onus is on the advice giver. That was one of the big takeaways that I had. If you are speaking to the end client who maybe is implementing or not implementing advice, how do you think high net worth families and business owners want to receive advice and guidance?
I think that's a question you need to ask them because it varies from person to person. Some people want you to do all of the background research yourself and then just present, your top recommendation, your best path forward. Kind of like, imagine if you were going to, God forbid, an oncologist. Do you really want them to lay out all of the background when you're reeling, right? Or would you say, what would you do if it were you? Right? So some people want that. Other people want to go home. They want to know 2 or 3 different options and they want to go home and research it all themselves. So part of your job as an advisor is to ask the client exactly that question. How do you like to receive advice? Have you ever worked with an advisor like me before? What went well with that? What was, what aspect of that, if any, was unsatisfying to you? Are there differences between the two of you in this room? Husband and wife, or husband and husband, or wife and wife, or any combination or permutation thereof. Even between business partners who aren't part of the same family. Are there differences between how you like to process information and come to decisions? The research is really clear on this, Jordan, that more advice is neglected, ignored, abandoned because of advisor variables than because of client variables.
Sure. I believe that.
And the worst mistake that professionals make is that they use way too much jargon. It's sort of like the deadly duo in advising is talking too much and talking too fancy.
Of course. I think it was this is a well-known phrase, but I didn't hear it until my wife used it one time fairly recently, and I couldn't believe that I'd never heard it. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. She's a teacher, so a high school teacher, and that was very applicable to her line of work as well as my line of work. But that stuck with me since, and I've been trying to make sure that I remember that on a day-to-day basis. I think it might be useful if we zoom out and provide a little bit of context. So describe an initial engagement that you might have with a client, or what's causing them to reach out to you in the first place.
So I guess there are two general categories: people who really get the whole need for prevention, to do things in advance of transitions that are going to occur, or people, that's one group of people. And then there's another group of people who reach out because they are in pain. They're relational pain, emotional pain. They are hitting some sort of impasse in their ability to do things as they might like it. It could be something like business succession. They're trying to make the handover to the next generation, but they can't get their cotton picking fingers off the helm. Or they just don't know how to handle the fact that several people in their family would like to take over the reins and only one person really can at the level that they're looking at. So, we just start the way you do with any other advice giver, right? A good givers, give them the opportunity to have a really good listening to. What is it that's on their hearts and minds? What are they concerned about? What would, if it worked swimmingly well, what would that look like? But it's usually transition really that's driving it. Either transitions that's not working so well, or an anticipated transition that they want to ensure works well.
As time goes on and we see the industry evolve, and it seems like every couple of years we're talking about these seismic shifts in the industry. Do you see I guess I'll call it a niche, even though I don't think it should be a niche. I think it should be shouted from the rooftops that having the psychological component of finances and money decisions ingrained in every financial advisor. Do you think your path continues to be separate from that of what I'm going to call a traditional financial advisor, or do you see those worlds colliding?
Colliding. My hope is that psychologists no longer own the human side of experience. I mean, we shouldn't own the human side of experience. There's lots of people who have really important things to say about the human side of experience. But let me put it this way. If you bring your dog to the vet, would you be upset if the vet refused to see your dog because the dog growled at the vet?
Yes.
I'd be upset, right? Like, it's not enough that they understand dog physiology, they need to understand dogness. They need to understand dog behavior. They need to know how to work with a dog so that they can get to the important aspect of diagnosis and treatment. Similarly, if you're going to work with a human being, you better understand what it is to be human. And you better get some skills in place for managing humanity, because tell you what, financial advisors have this unbelievable, for me, it's an unbelievable privilege that they work with people during the emotional peaks of their clients' lives and the emotional troughs of their clients' lives. They work with people who are anticipating marriage and the birth of a child, or preparing for college. They work with people who are going through divorce, who've just received a devastating diagnosis. They help people do business succession, business sale, create incredible retirements, make huge philanthropic donations to make the world a better place. Yes, they better understand the humanity behind the client so that they can, first of all, enjoy the journey, but also be skilled in facilitating it. I don't want to own behavior. I don't want to own the patent on understanding humanity. I want us to change that label you just used of the industry. I want to change it to profession.
I like that. The professionalization of what I do is something that I really care about. And there's got to be a disconnect somewhere, because I've got the alphabet soup behind my name. I've got licenses and designations within financial services. And in none of those courses that I take or curriculum that I was a part of, was there any component where we focus? Well, that's not true. Certified exit planning advisor, there was a nod there. But the emotional component of financials just wasn't there. We were doing Sharp ratios and Black-Scholes formulas and everything, but nobody wants to, maybe because it's too academically rigorous and it's just seen as outside of the purview of cut and dry financial information, that it's not focused on. But I think it's a huge missed opportunity when people come out of school, they get into the business, or they're already successful and they're not focusing more on. But I guess that's a great opportunity for you, because we get to bring you in on certain cases and relationships to aid us.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I sounded grumpy. I really do like being brought up to the table on stuff like that. I do appreciate the fact that advisors and lawyers often have deep and profoundly important relationship with their clients. And so I'm not coming in thinking I own the domain. Right now I'm writing a book on financial malfeasance, financial scandals. How do people get taken advantage of by financial advisors? And so again, what I want to get to is that the person of the advisor matters. His or her ability to connect with clients matters. His or her moral grounding matters. His or her ability to mind the boundaries, take care of their own life so that they don't get burned out and mess up and screw up. These are concepts that can be taught in business schools. They're being taught in medical schools. It's not that it's an excuse to be technically, we're going to compromise the technical aspects of your training so that you can learn how to talk to a person. And we're going to have to balance those out somehow. So it's going to have to be both and. Like I said earlier in the podcast, Jordan, it's really easy to give an exam where we just have people list 10 cognitive biases. It's a lot harder to test people on how would they work with people demonstrating this. And yet it's being done, and it can be done. And there's always continuing education, like you seem to be a champion of yourself, so that you can just get better at solidifying both sides of your skill set, your technical and your personal.
I'm fascinated to read the new book. Do you have a time frame for when that might be coming out?
Boy, no, I don't actually. I'm working with a solicitor from England who's been involved in prosecuting folks involved in many of the financial scandals over the years. And it's my first time working with a co-author.
Oh,
Holy cow, that is a I'm used to being the boss of things. And so learning how to write together and how to yeah, just bring visions together. That's what we're working on right now. So with any luck, we will get this baby birthed by next year,
okay.
and we'll be out into the world. But we're not, we're far, far from that right now.
The question that I'm leaving everybody with, regardless of if it's an attorney, financial psychologist, M&A banker, um, everybody has misconceptions or misunderstandings about what professionals actually do. Do you want to debunk any myths or set the record straight about what Dr. Moira Somers brings to the table or the services that you provide that we might not understand on the surface?
Hmm. I think sometimes people expect that I'm going to do a deep dive into people's psyches, and that I'm going to fix somebody at the table. I'm often called in because there's some identified hooligan or black sheep that they want me to just like slap into shape. And so that is not what happens. Um, things, families are just fascinating. But here's what I know, they can make changes rapidly. They can forgive in a heartbeat, and um, they can set up things so that generations to come are left better off in all kinds of ways, including emotionally and developmentally, by decisions that they make at the table here and now. And so that's really what we're looking for, is to give everybody a chance to be heard, to develop processes that are great for decision making. And if people need healing and help to get healing, then absolutely I will find those resources for people, but I won't do that as a condition of my engagement.
Sure. It's a really uplifting note to end on. And again, Dr. Summers, I really appreciate you taking the time today. I think this is a treat for everybody who listened in. Everything will be linked in the show notes, including your website, the book, LinkedIn, other social media profiles. Thank you so much for being so generous.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Price Discovery Money and Mindset is brought to you by Wernick Wealth Managers and Chagrin Valley Business Strategies. Opinions expressed by Jordan and guests are their own and do not represent investment advice, solicitation, or the like. For more information and resources referenced in this episode, be sure to check out the show notes. Thank you and see you next time.